In January 1986, the world lost one of its preeminent musicians when at the age of 54, Indian classical sitarist Pandit Nikhil Banerjee died of a sudden heart attack. Though Nikhil Banerjee had often traveled, taught, and performed in the West, he was largely unknown and unappreciated outside the rarefied environment of North Indian Hindustani classical music. A shy and humble person, he never sought the limelight. In fact, he shunned it in his quiet and dignified pursuit of spiritual transcendence through music.
His musicality, his depth, was far transcendent of just Indian music. It speaks to anybody who understands musical depth and understands the combination of virtuosity in the service of musical expression, not in the service of display.
He was so brilliant that he would come up with the right kind of expression that would give the music its best dimension, the right kind of balance and proportion that is the hallmark of any great work of art, was the first point under consideration for him.
This is somebody who had a conception of music that was universal and yet was being realized in a very particular idiom. It was deep and linked and continuous and true to its origin and just beautifully realized.
He came to be known as a great sitar player despite heavy odds, despite a lot of political goings-on in the music world. He never tried to fight politics with politics. A positive thing about that was that he was 100% involved in his music, created some of the best music ever, and that had an impact directly on people. But one of the negative sides of that is that many people are not aware of his music to the extent they really should be.
He had in his heart to purify himself. That's why he didn't care so much about self-promotion. He said, if I go towards that side, then I'll be away from my music. Then I'll be away from what I'm trying to achieve.
He was one of the best, you see. I had a big hope for his future. And we all miss him.
In our music, it is freedom within the discipline which matters, and innovation or imagination, they play a very big part in the interpretation of ragas. It is not merely a question of hitting certain notes, playing with certain phrases. The nuances, the undertones and the overtones, the color that is provided, the sound production of those phrases inevitably make a difference in the interpretation. In the case of Nikhil, it was his loyalty to the traditional form which was important, yet he did make it sound different. And he did make it sound quite wonderful.
Each rag within a certain frame of notes and movements has kind of a single message, you can say. It's like one personality. Even if there are little variations, even if there are overlapping of moods, like sometimes joy and sadness together, each one has a distinct character that cannot be mixed up with others. He maintained that there should be a sense of wonder in your approach towards the rag. He was worshipping the rag. He was trying to first have an invocation, try to bow down to the rag and ask that it should take hold of him and enlighten his mind, inspire him and carry him through.
There was an intelligence to his development of the rag. There was a fluidity. You sensed an incredibly active and fertile mind, just coming up with endless permutations that were so right for the rag and at the same time were so musically absolute. For me, it was like listening to Bach. When I listen to Bach, I hear this incredibly fertile mind who was so completely free while working with the most rigid compositional structures. I felt that Nikhil was that kind of artist when he took a rag, and he never lost sight of what the emotional power of the raga was, but at the same time he was constantly unfurling these beautiful, beautiful variations within the framework of the raga.
His approach was very yogic. In order to play music right, you have to have tremendous control, dedication, concentration. And that's what yoga is, concentration of mind and heart. And that creates this incredible power that can make people cry, that can make people laugh. And the purpose of music is to uplift you. Uplift your spirit, uplift your mind from the mundane. The true test of success of musician, if they can color your mind, as they say about raga, that ranjati iti raga, that which colors your mind.
Nikhil Banerjee was born in Calcutta, India on October 14, 1931, into a middle-class Hindu Brahmin family. His father, Jitendranath Banerjee, worked for the Survey of India as a draftsman and was also an accomplished amateur sitarist. It was at the early age of 4 that Nikhil Banerjee first showed an inclination to music.
There was a general atmosphere of practicing, discussing, and a hobby of music in the house. In those days, a middle-class Bengali Brahmin family did not take up music seriously. It could be a hobby. They patronized music, but never take it up as a profession.
My father had very little time to pursue the musical line, but he used to play every day after coming back from office. Everyone used to sit together and listen to father. And we used to drop one by one, and we all fell asleep. One day, my father was playing, and he left his sitar on the ground, and he went out for something, and nobody was there. So Nikhil quietly, he started playing. My father, he came back and he said, "Was it you playing?" He said, "Yes," and he was very nervous. My father was delighted. He said, "Play it again. Now I'll show you how to hold it. I know it's too big for you. I will hold it for you and you play." And then my father bought a sitar for him, a very small sitar. When he started, Nikhil used to be accompanied by my brother Tapun. Tapun was very good with tabla. Only he used to accompany him for 6-7 years.
They always accompanied each other in every concert that they played during that time. My father was the youngest person to win the All Bengal Music Conference, and Tapan also won the counterpart at that same year. And they were very close to each other.
In 1947, riots broke out across India when Muslim-dominated parts of newly independent India were partitioned into the newly created states of Pakistan and East Pakistan, the latter now known as Bangladesh.
My father had to survive the gruesome effects of the Hindu-Muslim riot that took place during the partition of India, Pakistan, India, Bangladesh. They had to vacate their house. There was rioting going on everywhere, and the house was in a predominantly Muslim neighborhood. And they had to go away and stay somewhere else for a prolonged time.
During this period of social upheaval, Nikhil's younger brother Tapan contracted typhoid and passed away.
It affected my younger brother Nikhil tremendously. It affected everyone in the family. That was devastating.
After initially learning from his father, Nikhil Banerjee continued his formal studies with a number of well-known and highly esteemed local teachers in the Calcutta area, including sitarist John Gomes, Sarodis Radhika Mohan Maitra, sitarist Mustaq Ali Khan, and the musician and musicologist Barinda Kishore Rai Chaudhary, who eventually introduced Nikhil to the legendary Ustad Alauddin Khan. Ustad Alauddin Khan was at the time one of the most influential and respected teachers and performers of North Indian Hindustani music. A Bengali Muslim, he was invited to the royal court in Maihar at the invitation of the local Maharaja. Primarily a Sarodist, he was known for his immense knowledge of classical music and his incredible facility and innovation on many instruments. As a guru, Alauddin Khan demanded absolute commitment from his disciples, his most well-known disciples being sitarist Ravi Shankar and his own son, Sarodist Ali Akbar Khan.
Nikhil was attending all the music festivals wherever I played and wherever my father played. Whenever my father goes to Calcutta, Nikhil used to come and sit down all day. And he asked, why you come every day and why sitting all day? What do you want? Nikhil say, I want to become your disciple. Father said, no. Like that, 2-3 years passed.
After some initial hesitation, the aging Alauddin Khan agreed to accept Nikhil as a disciple, whereupon Nikhil left his home and family in Calcutta and moved many hundreds of miles away to the tiny hamlet of Maihar in the central Indian state of Madhya Pradesh to live and study with his guru.
One afternoon, I see my grandfather arriving from Calcutta along with Nikhil Banerjee, and Nikhil Banerjee had a huge, like a coffin kind of a box. I used to wonder what is in there. Then I found out it was sitar is inside. I was very young at that time, probably 7 or 8.
Ustad Alauddin Khan took him as his son. He used to look after him, all his needs, but in return he wanted his devotion. He wanted every bit of his energy for music, and whatever he gave, he wanted him to absorb it completely. He was a very tough guru in that sense.
He used to stay next to my grandfather's room. My grandfather could hear his practice. He used to work very, very hard, almost all day. He's practicing most of the time.
When we were in our teacher's house, our guru's house, we used to practice about 10 to 12 hours a day.
10 to 12 hours
per day. That means, you just practice and you forget the whole world.
Yes.
Sometime, our teacher especially I'm talking about my teacher, he was so strong and man of very strict discipline. So naturally, he will force us to practice. Sometimes when we didn't feel like practicing, he will come and say, until unless you practice, the food will not be served.
After several years of study in Maihar, something unexpected happened which forced Nikhil to stop learning from Alauddin Khan, which subsequently led Nikhil to continue his studies with Alauddin Khan's son, the great Sarodist Ali Akbar Khan, who was at the time the court musician of the Maharaja of Jodhpur in Rajasthan state.
Some disciple, they planned something, the two of them. They came to my father and say, promise me what I request you will never say no. So my father said, what? Because first you promise, then we will say. The father said, all right, I promise. Then those disciples, they said, you promise that you won't teach Nikhil anymore. And father shocked. His father never expected that this kind of thing will happen. Immediately, he sent Nikhil Banerjee to me. Whenever I used to visit my father, I used to bring him. He told Nikhil to play his sitar in the living room. And he closed half door in bedroom and called me there. And my father telling me all the time, this is not right, you have to correct this thing. Nikhil was with me for more than 15 years in Jodhpur, in Bombay, then Calcutta.
During their many years together, Nikhil Banerjee and Ali Akbar Khan performed countless duets throughout India.
The duets between Nikhil Banerjee and my father were quite extraordinary, and they used to play for hours and hours.
I remember that when my father was in Calcutta and he was sick, he needed some little minor operation. And Nikhil used to meet every time to my father. Nikhil told me that my father cried and say, my son, forgive me that I could not teach you.
Ali Akbar Khan was not only my father's guru, but for a important phase in my father's life, he was probably also the best friend. My father used to call him Dada in Bengali, which means older brother. He was not only a musical influence, which he obviously was in a very strong way, he also made a big difference in every aspect of my father's life.
He used to call me Dada because he's a disciple of my father, therefore he became my guru brother, guru bhai. So I can't say he's my disciple. As a guru bhai, I taught him.
He had then from Ustad Ali Akbar Khan all the highest values of aesthetics, matchless aesthetics. He always mentioned that without Ustad Ali Akbar Khan's help, he wouldn't have had light.
When you hear Nikhil's music, and you hear Kansap's music side by side, you see the similarity. Means how to proceed from one note to another, very calm and quiet and very dignified. Each note has so much depth.
Most disciples seem to be helplessly caged in the technique and mannerism of their respective gurus. They can't develop a strong enough musical personality to break away from the bond and be themselves. Nikhil did this wonderfully.
He grew up with the tradition, understood the tradition, derived all that was good and great, and then assimilated elements that could only enrich his music.
He has shown that you can maintain the right balance between traditionalism and an open approach. He really mastered the framework upright first and then held it in whichever way he wanted to.
At the time Nikhil Banerjee was emerging as a mature artist, the world of classical Indian sitar was dominated by two musical giants and very influential figures, Vilayat Khan and Ravi Shankar. Vilayat Khan, from a family of accomplished musicians, was known for his incredible lyricism and astonishing technique on the sitar. Ravi Shankar, once a dancer, was known both for his classicism and innovations, as well as his rhythmic virtuosity.
Vilayat Khan and Nikhil went to the same school, and he used to visit Ustad Vilayat Khan's house, and whenever Pandit Ravi Shankar came to Calcutta, he used to see him.
These two dominant forces, Ravi Shankar ji and Vilayat Khan, they were the most popular known musicians with distinctive styles of their own, and it was a difficult time for Banerjee to make his place between these two.
He worked so hard in order to reach to their level, but at the same time Nikhilda also knew that Nikhilda will have to do something else, because if he follows only Vilayat Khan Sahab, he will never be Vilayat Khan Sahab. If he follows only Pandit Ravi Shankar, he will never be Pandit Ravi Shankar. He will have to find his own way.
He said he had to cry nights after nights just with himself to really find out what could make him really unique. He modified his stand a little bit. Then he said, well, you have to have certain models.
He experimented with different kinds of sitars. He eventually ended up using a quite heavy sitar with quite heavy strings to achieve a long sustain. He also absorbed influences from other musicians.
Annapurna Devi, the younger sister of Ali Akbar Khan and also a disciple of her father Alauddin Khan, became a master of the Surbahar, in essence a bass sitar. The Surbahar traditionally was played slowly as a solo instrument during the alap, or the invocation segment of a raga, without tabla drum accompaniment. Throughout his life, Nikhil Banerjee would come to her for continued learning.
Annapurna Devi was the person who made him have a much bolder right hand stroke, because she was essentially a surbahar player, and hence she had this bold right hand stroke, which could then, in combination with the thicker string, really sustain the sound for very long.
He wanted to learn her depth of experience and depth of music, or the feelings, or the aesthetic senses, spiritual senses.
His style was neither the style of Ali Akbar or Annapurna or Alauddin Khan. It was a style of his own, in which diverse influences and techniques and styles were combined and made into something different.
Life in his house was very, very busy. Doorbell never stopped ringing, the phone never stopped ringing, there were people coming and going all the time. He would always practice in the morning. You couldn't move him. He wouldn't answer the phone, he wouldn't get up, he wouldn't barely talk to anybody until he felt that he had fulfilled his own obligation towards his music.
He used to practice for long hours and he never missed a day. The only time he would miss his practice was usually the day after a major concert. He would give himself a break. He was quite sympathetic about newcomers into the field of music. He allowed them to listen to him and allowed them to hang around when he was practicing. If they had any particular question, he always eagerly answered them.
I used to sit with him. Sometimes I took my sitar if I had questions, and he would answer them and he would show me, he would play. He played on my sitar many times, and I told him, gee, how could my sitar sound so beautiful? And he was very nice about it. I said, how come I play like this and it doesn't sound nice? He said, just practice.
He really inspired me. He was saying, oh, you should practice more. Come on, practice, And then he used to say, look, I practice. At that time, I was maybe 10 years old, 10, 11 years old. And he said, look, my finger is started, bleeding. And I thought, oh my God, but how do you play? And he said, I'm still playing. So you have to practice too.
There is no shortcut because it's a lifetime's job. Full dedication is required, and practice is the word. Whatever talent or genius you are, it is 90% perspiration and 10% inspiration.
He was so much in practice that the things which are risky for normal musicians did not appear as risk for him. There was always some extraordinary touch.
All the musical actions of sitar playing were at his fingertips. He commanded tremendous virtuosity, but he has never used virtuosity as an end. It was only a means to reach his musical goal.
They used to have these open-air conferences where they would have a stage at one end of a big, long field, and people would fill up the entire field. I remember my father starting the late night, which was the norm for the main artist of the day, and then he would continue playing till early morning. You would see the dawn break out and he was still playing. And he would try to stop, and the people would request, and everybody would start to shout for the next one, another piece, and he would play another one.
He applied the same standard to his performance as he applied to his practice, and that is the highest possible standard. He never took his audience for granted. He always made a great effort, even when he was not feeling well. He would appear on stage, he would sit down, he would acknowledge his audience, he would acknowledge his tabla player, but as soon as he sat down on stage, he more or less disappeared behind his sitar.
He used to look on his instrument and concentrate so much. He was so intense and introvert. He didn't used to see the audience.
His demeanor never changed. It was just the music. And then, of course, mixed with the incredible depth and musicality, and what he was expressing was unlike any other musician that I ever heard, both Hindustani and, frankly, even in the West.
Rarely ever talked about his own music or his own performance. And I tried to draw him out on the subject, and I never succeeded. He left it to his audience to judge him, and to the musicians that he respected.
Once or twice he would ask me after the program, how do you think people took it? And then if I would try to say something that I felt, no, don't tell what you felt. I just want to hear what is the feedback from the people. Whether he played well or he didn't, he never opened his mouth. I don't think anybody has heard him ever say, well, I have given a great concert.
I have known all great musicians to fail, to disappoint their audience sometimes. I mean, it happens to everybody. It has happened to the greatest of them all. But I have never heard Nikhil Banerjee to fail. His consistency in the matter of recitals was amazing. He had that tremendous capacity of losing himself in music. It is this concentration and this ability to drown oneself into one's music raised Nikhil to the level of greatness.
He was never very enthusiastic about creating a big public relation to project himself, to prove to the people that he needs attention, that he is a great performer, because he was so rich in himself and musically.
I have certainly not ever been to a press conference called by Nikhil Banerjee. It is rather strange that he achieved as much fame as he did without the normal devices of promotion and self-promotion and press relations.
One of the things that he hated was the way Indian classical musicians are rated as 1, 2, 3, they're put into some kind of a rank. He wanted to be able to play the music without having to deal with that. This was something that even if he tried to ignore, it was hard to do, but he tried his best.
He would acknowledge criticism if he felt there was a genuine understanding, if there was enough knowledge and enough background on part of the critic to really give a clear and objective assessment. He had no problems with constructive criticism. Of course, he was happy about being acknowledged and being respected as a musician, to know that what he is doing actually makes sense and that he is giving something to his audience.
In 1968, Nikhil Banerjee received the Padma Shri Award from the Government of India in recognition for distinguished excellence in the arts. And in 1974, Nikhil Banerjee's genius and unique contribution to the classical music of India was formally acknowledged when he received the Sangeet Natak Academy Award, India's highest national recognition given to practicing artists, both awards bestowed by the President of India.
He used to get very shy in public. I remember going to different concerts of different people with him, and he always tried to do it discreetly so that the people did not make a lot of fuss about it. The only time he was probably not shy was when he was playing the music. The shyness that he expressed in public just became more intense when he was with his family. I do not remember him being very talkative with us at all. Even though he was an extremely articulate speaker, he found it hard to express what he was thinking or feeling with his words. But he always enjoyed listening to other people. Anybody who came to hear him, and he was a professor or some learned person, scholar of any kind, he would give him extra time to sit down with him and talk.
He would rarely talk about his contemporary musicians. Whenever he said something, it was usually an expression of respect. He would respect everybody who made a sincere effort. He was very generous in that sense.
His relationship with other musicians was very good. Whenever I saw him, he gave me so much respect, even to artists like me who was very junior to him.
His relationship with his tabla accompanists were quite wonderful. And there were many tabla players who would come to his house and practice with him.
Oh, it's a great fun to play with Nikhil. I was really fortunate that I had that opportunity to play with him, and he really encouraged me a lot. Nikhil was very nice about explaining things because he had very clear conception.
Nikhil Banerjee always emulated the way Alauddin Khan Sahab led his life. His tastes were simple and he was a stoic by nature. This is one of the reasons why people always thought of him as, a saintly person. But people sometimes also tend to overemphasize on that and have a wrong impression of him. Although he was a saintly person, although he believed in plain living and high thinking, he was not an impractical person.
He was a very intelligent man with a powerful intellect. He was also kind, he was compassionate, he was not very demonstrative. He wouldn't say much about his spiritual and political inclinations. He was very discreet about that. He was a person who very deeply thought about the world and everything that goes on, but he would be careful not to upset anybody.
He was a straightforward kind of person, but he wouldn't go into arguments and spoil his mood. He would just keep quiet and withdraw. There was always an inner being which was hidden from others.
If he was with people he knew closely and intimately, he could be very outgoing and quite gregarious, and he had a great sense of humor as well. He could be hilariously funny when he wanted to be.
His friends and everybody, close associates, they all knew how he used to laugh out sometimes, and he would enjoy cutting jokes, wanting to hear jokes from people.
I had such a great respect for that man. He was very scholarly person. He had tremendous knowledge of everything. Philosophy, literature, music, drama, yoga, religion, sports. You talk to him any subject.
In philosophy, he was very much interested about how one can reach the final stage of knowledge. He always said that music for him was a means of self-realization. Not doing these pujas and worships formally every day, offering flowers and fruits to gods. Even sometimes he would say, can Goddess Kali help you to play good? No, your practice can do that.
Whenever this point used to come, we talk about God or Goddess, he used to laugh. He said, I don't believe in that. What I believe is my music. I believe in sound. Then I used to raise this question, okay, if you believe that, then who is controlling? He used to say, well, nature. Nature is nature. I cannot call a god or goddess. Why I am going to the temple? For what reason? To do puja. To do puja to whom? Nikhil always used to say that. Puja to whom? I said, well, Mother Kali. Who is Mother Kali? Do you know her? Do you have her address?
In one sense, you might think that he was an atheist, but he was very philosophical. This philosophical mind was very much there in his music. He was a believer of God not as something beyond yourself, God as resting within you as the supreme energy.
Among Nikhil Banerjee's successes was finding receptive audiences to Indian classical music outside of India, throughout Asia, in the West, in Europe, and especially in the United States, where the introduction of Indian classical music was first pioneered in the 1950s by Ali Akbar Khan and Ravi Shankar. And in Berkeley, California, Nikhil Banerjee taught and performed for a number of years as part of programs supported by the American Society for Eastern Arts, the Ali Akbar College of Music, the Center for World Music, and Musical Traditions.
Nikhil Banerjee first time came to America in 1967, came to Berkeley, invited by the American Society for Eastern Arts. He came here to teach sitar and also to perform with my father and as well as a soloist.
He thought that our music should not be stuck only in India. It should go beyond India, that it should be spread all over.
He has a very important role in popularizing sitar and Indian classical music abroad. He toured many cities in USA and Canada and in European countries also. And that time people were not so much aware of Indian classical music. But because of the contribution of Pandit Ravi Shankar ji and also Ustad Ali Akbar Khan Sahab, people were getting into it.
His role in bringing Indian music to the West was that of presenting yet another facet of the same diamond. Presenting his own style, especially playing of the sitar is concerned, and he did make quite an impact on his audience. He made a great impact wherever he went, whether that be in India or in the West.
The sitar is the instrument that has become so popular in the Western world. Let's listen to the sitar as it plays a folk song from Bengal.
He occasionally would talk about the reception that he got in the West and Western interest in Indian culture. He seemed to have a bit mixed feelings about it. He could see that the interest was genuine, but he could also see that some of the interest maybe was based on rather vague and nebulous assumptions of Indian spirituality and Indian culture, which was sort of a product of the 60s and the 70s.
Nikhil was aware of the great movement that was happening in the country in terms of the discovery of Indian music. Ustad Ali Akbar Khan and Pandit Ravi Shankar, Ustad Al-Raka were making terrific waves musically, mostly because of their discovery at places like Monterey Pop and at Woodstock. Monterey Pop was a major popular culture manifestation, of which Ravi Shankar and Ustad Al-Raka, the tabla player, were players on a grand scale. It preceded Woodstock, but it led to Woodstock. It operated on a magnitude of popular culture that Nikhil never reached and never could reach and never wanted to reach, frankly, I don't believe.
Ravi Shankar's performance at the Monterey Pop Festival was a bit of a watershed for the exposure of Hindustani music to a Western audience, to an American and probably European audience as well, because that was such a highly documented event. Ravi was somewhat known to audiences because of his association with the Beatles. Nikhil's performance coming within the same year, it's sort of emblematic of the difference between those two artists. Ravi Shankar is a superb showman. He's a superb communicator to his audience. Nikhil was a much more introspective performer.
Nikhil was not going to be influenced by popular culture, and he never reached for that, never wanted that. He was very shy about recordings to begin with. And so it's really a miracle that he attracted the kind of audience that he did. He's somebody that other musicians revered and listened to, and was not somebody that necessarily a popular crowd was going to get behind. He wasn't playing for an American popular audience.
You are dealing with an artist who had the most profound depth of musical vision, and he combined it with the most astonishing technical facility on his instrument. There was some quality in Nikhil's performance and in his seriousness that spoke very directly to a Western audience. Nikhil's depth, his virtuosity, and his presence, I think, made him powerful to anyone in the West who got to see him perform. I honestly believe that Nikhil was one of the most deep and profound musicians of all time, and not just of Hindustani music. With the Beatles and the turning to the East and Eastern philosophy and a kind of new spirituality that was evolving at that time, Ravi connected directly to a certain kind of spiritual yearning in younger Americans at the time. Nikhil, he wasn't about that. In fact, Nikhil never talked about spirituality. He never promoted it. He rarely spoke about his music in those terms. How Hindustani music was generally approached by Westerners at that time, or the younger Westerners who were in search of something more transcendent than the conventional spirituality that they'd experienced through their upbringing. Through his own way of approaching music, he was much less of a pop personality, or never was a pop personality.
Nikhil, well, welcome to Eastern Eye. You've been playing for a long time, since you were the age of 4. And you really learned the craft through Ustad Alauddin Khan. How did that come about?
I went to Maihat to my guru, Baba Alauddin Khan Sahib, when I was about 16 years of age.
As early as that? Of course, in a field which is dominated by Muslim sitar players, did you have difficulty in coming into this area?
Naturally, all the great musicians, mostly, I mean about 95%, they are all Muslims. So naturally, we had to struggle a lot. In the beginning, they are not ready to accept me as a good musician. I had to struggle a lot for that.
Of course, Alauddin Khan must have helped in pressing you forward.
Oh, yes. It was all because of him.
And in traveling all over the world, you've been to America, you've been even to the Soviet Union. In these various places that you visited, have the audiences been all fairly similar, or have they been more receptive in some places?
But now, especially sitar is quite popular all over the world. So, of course, particularly America, since I think 56, so many great musicians are visiting that country till now.
The audiences really differed, but in America they were the most receptive, you think?
Most receptive, yes.
He used to enjoy the different experiences, the different places he went, the different people he met. At Mills College in California, for example, they also had people from the other countries playing different instruments that he used to meet, and he really enjoyed that. And then he would go to different countries in Europe. Usually he was a very calm, passive, laid-back person, and he would talk about these different cultures, people, and countries, and he would get visibly animated. He also liked teaching in the US because it was a new experience for him, and it was nice to teach people who had no preconceived idea about his music.
I remember Nikhil's classes as a bunch of extremely dedicated students, right? They were really serious. They were really happy that they had a teacher of that quality and a music to aim for of that beauty. I can picture one of his classes with everybody really intent on trying to get every bit of information they could during those early summer sessions when they had a chance just a short time each year to interact with him personally. He was pure gold.
According to the Indian theory, the first scale discovered was Kafi, or like, one of your minor scales. This is considered the first scale discovered, and it is all on, they did it by fourth intervals, like every fourth, fourth note, again this flat note, but in the Baigel it will be played, it floats in between notes.
Nikhil Da was very approachable. He had a jocular style of teaching that was very appealing to American students. He was honored, I think, and touched by the students who he grew to love because of their spontaneity and also their ability to hear his music. I mean, this for him was a revelation that there were people outside of the culture. There were aficionados who went beyond the bounds of being Indian or being Bengali even, who could follow his music and be touched by it, deeply touched.
He wanted his students to be dead serious about studying the music and about practicing. But if you were that way, if you were serious, he related to you in the most comfortable and casual way. He wasn't in any way standoffish. He wanted a level of collegiality, I think. He'd go to people's houses where there was gatherings and parties. He would have people over to his house. I think Nikhil loved coming to America because it removed him from the formality and the politics of the Hindustani music world. Even though it has incredibly refined aesthetics, even though it has some spiritual overtones, we're talking about people being highly competitive, people protecting their turf, and people being involved with things that aren't just about the music, about fame and fortune, those kinds of things. The seriousness of Nikhil's personality and his basic humility and introversion, he was not comfortable operating in that highly politicized world. Coming to America was a great relief, I think, to both be away from that environment. He certainly enjoyed the devotion of his American students, and he could be a teacher to those American students without the very formalized guru-student relationship that would have been required if he had students in India. He said consistently that he wouldn't take students in India because he didn't want the responsibility of being a guru in the Indian sense.
He always said, I'm not a teacher. My job is to be a performer. And so that did not make it very easy for his wannabe disciples. I had a bit of a hard time with that. Everybody did. With the benefit of hindsight, I have to say that it was the right thing for him to do. He had to follow his path. What he wanted to achieve, his commitment was so great that it really would leave no room for him to be a teacher in the traditional sense. However, he always said, I will start teaching when I'm 60. I think that was genuine. He really honestly had the intention of, at some point in his life, of lessening his involvement with performance and really starting to teach. Unfortunately, there was no time for him to do that. The way to learn from him was simply to sit there and watch him practice. And the people who were tenacious enough to be there and not to be discouraged by his rather reluctant approach to teaching, they benefited very greatly.
In 1963, Nikhil Banerjee fell in love and married the former Roma Chatterjee.
My parents did not have a traditional arranged marriage. They met on their own, they fell in love, and they got married. She was quite a feisty young woman. If anything went wrong in the house, my mother was the one taking charge of everything. My father didn't quite do it. Unfortunately, my mother did not get to travel a lot with my father. Unlike most Bengali Indian families, we did not have the rest of the family living with us. We were always by ourselves and not my grandparents, uncles and aunts, which was the norm in those days. So she did feel alone, but I think she tried to keep herself busy with all her different hobbies and me. It was about 6 months that he used to be gone in his foreign tour. And then while he was in India, he used to go out for a week or so at a time. And in those little trips, say to Bombay, Delhi, Ahmedabad, in those places, we sometimes accompanied him. I remember times when it was quite difficult to not have him there. He was a very concerned parent. He did try to keep in touch with what I was doing, even though he was not there through such a long periods of time. And emotionally, it was hard to not have him there all the time for me. My father was never the kind of person who could share his anxieties or his problems with anybody, including family members. The older he got, the more he suffered from all the anxieties and the tensions and nervousness, and he internalized it, and I think that really affected his health. He always had a health problem, mainly with his eyes and his heart, and that started from a very early age. He had a disease called beriberi. The disease was an epidemic that went rampant throughout Calcutta. His eyesight became progressively worse, and he used to make my mother read the books for him. One of his favorite authors was Rabindranath Tagore, and he would listen to that for hours.
Rabindranath Tagore was a great influence in his life. His poems are so deep-rooted and philosophical. He brought a new devolution, not only to music but to literature.
My father had his first 2 heart attacks on the same day, and that was in the late 1970s. And right after that, for about 6 months, he did not go for any concert tours. He was under medication and under constant doctor's care. His doctor was here in Calcutta. The doctor insisted that he take up some kind of an exercise, and that's when my mother was successful in making him take up yoga. My father was starting to lose a lot of weight. I remember him to be somebody who was always eating and quite big, but towards the end he became quite emaciated actually. Some of the memories I have of those last few days are my wedding ceremony, because that was a time when he openly showed any emotion of me leaving, and that was very unusual for him. Towards the end of his life, he became a recluse. He used to enjoy being on his own more than being with anybody else.
In the late fall of 1985, Nikhil Banerjee returned to India from teaching and touring in the United States, his final concert being at Carnegie Hall in New York. After a brief stop in London, he finally arrived home to Calcutta.
He came back from London. He had trouble with his heart. He was under care of many good physicians and doctors here. He was also treated in London. Nikhil could not perform quite some time. After he came back, he accepted, with doctor's permission, to perform in a big conference which is called Doverlin, and that was the last performance he had.